The air in the cartel-controlled market was thick with the scent of spices, fear, and something else, a lie. Mau Morales, a man claiming to be an Olympian, a cartel kidnapping survivor, stood beside me, his eyes darting. But it wasn't the shadowy figures in the alleyways that truly terrified me. It was the growing, sickening realization that the biggest threat wasn't from the cartel at all. It was from Mau himself. The story I'd come to Mexico to investigate was not the story I was uncovering. It was something far more insidious, far more personal. The intricate web of deceit he had spun was beginning to unravel, piece by agonizing piece. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. It was December 2024. An email landed in my inbox, an unsolicited plea from a filmmaker. He spoke of a story, a truly massive story, he said, that begged to be told on the big screen. A tale of survival against impossible odds, a man snatched from his life, thrust into a brutal, clandestine world. He spoke of Mauricio Morales, a former Olympian, allegedly kidnapped by a ruthless Mexican cartel. The cartel, upon discovering his athletic prowess, had supposedly forced him into a secret intercartel sporting tournament, competing for his very life. It sounded, frankly, unbelievable. My skepticism was immediate, a thick wall against such a sensational claim. Yet, the filmmaker's conviction was palpable, his words laced with an urgency that, despite my reservations, sparked a flicker of curiosity. Could such a thing truly happen? Despite my initial doubts, something about the filmmaker's earnestness resonated. I agreed to a preliminary call with Mauricio, or Mau as he preferred to be called. His voice on the phone was steady, yet tinged with a subtle tremor that hinted at untold trauma. He recounted his story with a chilling clarity, details flowing freely, almost too perfectly. He spoke of the fear, the isolation, the sheer terror of being an unwilling pawn in a cartel's brutal game. He painted a vivid picture of the clandestine tournament, the desperation of the other captives, the constant threat of violence. As he spoke, my skepticism, though still present, began to waver. The human element, the raw emotion in his voice, chipped away at my journalistic cynicism. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a kernel of truth buried within this extraordinary narrative. Perhaps this man had truly endured something horrific, something that demanded to be heard. Over the next several months, I immersed myself in Mau's world. Our conversation stretched for hours, conducted across time zones, delving deeper into the alleged kidnapping. He provided names, dates, locations, a tapestry of verifiable facts woven around the unbelievable core of his story. He described the faces of his captors, the specific makes of the vehicles, the remote, desolate compounds where he was supposedly held. Each detail, each recollection, was delivered with such conviction that it became harder and harder to dismiss. I cross-referenced what I could, searching for any discrepancies, any cracks in his narrative. While some elements remained elusive, the sheer volume and consistency of his account were compelling. The story, once dismissed as pure fantasy, began to take on a terrifying shape, a potential reality. Could this truly be a survivor's fragmented truth, a narrative too horrific to fully grasp? The time came to move beyond the virtual and into the visceral. I made the decision to travel to Mexico, to walk the ground Mau had described, to meet the people he claimed were involved. This was the acid test, the moment where the story would either solidify into undeniable truth or crumble into a fabricated delusion. Mau had expressed profound fear, a fear of retribution from the cartels if I investigated too closely. This fear, whether genuine or manufactured, dictated the precautions I took. I arranged for a local fixer, a seasoned professional with deep knowledge of the region and its dangers, to accompany me. The air in Mexico City felt different, charged with an intensity that was both thrilling and unsettling. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every bustling street corner a potential trap. I was stepping into a world that Mau had painted as brutal and unforgiving. But would it be Mau's world, or something far more complex? My arrival in Mexico City marked the true beginning of the unraveling. I met Mau in person, his demeanor matching the earnestness I perceived over the phone. We visited the alleged site of his kidnapping, a seemingly unremarkable street corner that, under his vivid description, transformed into a place of terror. I spoke with his associates, his family, piecing together a timeline. Yet, small inconsistencies, like faint whispers, began to surface. A detail about a specific car model that didn't quite fit, a witness's recollection that subtly diverged from Mao's. Individually, they were minor, easily dismissed as the fuzziness of memory after trauma. But collectively, they started to form a pattern, a barely perceptible tremor beneath the surface of his carefully constructed narrative. The ground beneath my journalistic feet felt less solid than before. What was I truly standing on? And what truth was waiting to be unearthed beneath these unsettling vibrations? One of the most critical parts of the investigation involved visiting a cartel-controlled market, a place Mao described as a nexus of his alleged captivity. Given the inherent dangers, I insisted on having a security guard accompany me, in addition to my trusted fixer. The market was a labyrinth of stalls, overflowing with goods, people, and an undercurrent of palpable tension. Every face seemed to hold a story, every shadow a potential threat. As Mao navigated us through the crowded alleys, his narrative became even more vivid, more immediate. He pointed out specific stalls, described encounters with shadowy figures, and recounted hushed conversations. Yet, even here, surrounded by the very atmosphere he claimed had defined his ordeal, the small inconsistencies persisted. A vendor he claimed to recognize wasn't there, a building he described had been renovated years ago. The details were off, just enough to prick at the edges of the story. It felt like walking through a meticulously crafted stage set, where the props were slightly out of place. The discrepancies grew bolder, more frequent. What began as minor inconsistencies now felt like deliberate misdirections. The narrative Mao had so carefully constructed, so convincingly delivered over months of interviews, was now visibly fraying at the edges. I found myself questioning not just the details, but the very foundation of his claim. Why would a survivor embellish, or outright invent, elements of such a traumatic experience? Was it a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of the unimaginable? Or was it something far more sinister? My conversations with the fixer and security guard, conducted discreetly, confirmed my growing unease. They, too, had noticed the subtle shifts, the moments where Mao's story didn't quite align with the reality on the ground. The initial fear I felt of cartel retribution began to morph into a different kind of dread, the chilling realization that I might be dealing with a master manipulator. How could one person weave such an elaborate tapestry of deceit, ensnaring even seasoned journalists? The truth, when it began to surface, was far stranger and more convoluted than any cartel kidnapping. It was a story not of physical abduction, but of calculated psychological manipulation and elaborate fraud. My investigation peeled back layers of fabricated identities, revealing a man who had not only invented a past as an Olympian but had also crafted an entirely false persona. This wasn't just a simple lie, it was a grand performance, designed to captivate and exploit. The thread led me through an astonishing maze, connections to an international NGO, which Mao had allegedly defrauded, fleeting but tantalizing links to Mexican celebrities, who had unknowingly been drawn into his orbit, and even, incredibly, the iconic artist Yoko Ono, whose name had been used in some capacity within his intricate schemes. The scope of his deception was breathtaking, the audacity of it almost admirable in its twisted genius. The narrative I had come to verify was shattered, replaced by a far more disturbing reality. What kind of person creates such an elaborate, multifaceted lie, and for what ultimate purpose? Mauricio Morales was not a former Olympian. He was not a victim of a cartel kidnapping. He was a con artist, a master of illusion, who had woven a life out of pure fiction. His athletic background, his traumatic ordeal, his very identity as a survivor, all of it was a carefully constructed facade. The goal, it seemed, was not just attention, but likely financial gain, leveraging sympathy and the allure of a dramatic backstory to secure funding, support, or perhaps even a film deal. The filmmaker who had initially contacted me had been another unwitting pawn in Mao's elaborate game. The sheer depth of the deception was staggering. Every tear Mao had shed, every tremor in his voice, every detail he had recounted, had been part of a performance. It was a chilling testament to the power of storytelling, even when that story is entirely fabricated. The true horror wasn't the cartel Mao had invented, but the psychological manipulation he had so skillfully employed. The true victims were not just the institutions Mao had defrauded, but everyone who had invested their time, their empathy, and their belief in his tale. The filmmaker, the associates, the family, and even myself. We had all been drawn into his web, our emotions exploited, our trust betrayed. This wasn't a crime of violence, but a crime of profound emotional abuse. The psychological toll of realizing you've been so thoroughly duped, that a person you believed to be suffering was in fact meticulously orchestrating a grand illusion, is immense. It forces a re-evaluation of every interaction, every detail, every shared moment. It casts a long, dark shadow over the very nature of truth and authenticity. How does one recover from such a betrayal, not from a stranger, but from someone who presented themselves as a desperate soul in need of help? The details of Mao's motives remain, in some ways, shrouded in the very mystery he cultivated. Was it purely for financial gain? Was it a deep-seated psychological need for attention, for validation, for the thrill of the deception itself? The answer likely lies in a complex interplay of all these factors. His ability to maintain such an elaborate charade, to meticulously manage multiple false identities and narratives, speaks to a profound level of cunning and a disturbing detachment from reality. The story of Mao Morales is a stark reminder of the fragile nature of truth in an age where narratives can be so easily crafted and disseminated. It forces us to question not just the stories we are told, but the very mechanisms by which we verify them. And it leaves a haunting question: how many other massive stories out there are equally, or even more, meticulously fabricated, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting truth seekers? My reporting on the true story of Mauricio Morales eventually revealed the full scope of his elaborate fraud, detailing the false identities, the fabricated athletic career, and the exploitation of various individuals and organizations. The initial shock gave way to a deeper sense of responsibility to set the record straight, not just for myself, but for all those who had been deceived. The experience served as a potent, if painful, lesson in the complexities of human deception and the critical importance of rigorous verification. The shadowy figures Mao had invented in the cartel-controlled market faded, replaced by the far more chilling reality of a man capable of such intricate, sustained manipulation. The true horror wasn't a cartel's violence, but the quiet, calculated cruelty of a con artist who preyed on empathy and the human desire for a compelling narrative. The story became less about a kidnapping and more about the psychological battlefield of trust and betrayal. The investigation into Mao Morales became a profound journey into the darker corners of human psychology. It underscored the insidious power of a well-told lie, and the ease with which fact can blur into fiction, especially when fueled by a desire for a compelling story. The online world, where initial contact was made, provided the perfect incubator for Mao's narrative to grow, finding a receptive audience before critical scrutiny could fully apply. The lessons learned were invaluable, stark reminders of the constant vigilance required in journalism. This wasn't merely a case of a false claim, it was a masterclass in manipulation, a sophisticated performance designed to exploit and deceive on a global scale. While Mao's motives may never be fully transparent, the trail of his deception is a stark warning. The unseen witness in this whole ordeal was the truth itself, slowly, painstakingly revealed, piece by agonizing piece, from beneath the rubble of an elaborate, horrifying lie. A testament to the fact that even the most meticulously constructed fictions eventually crumble under the weight of relentless inquiry.